Okay, so today is episode 32. Paul's writing to the Philippians, the church in Philippi, and this is going to be the last of the four prison epistles that they call them. And we talked about a lot of the writings that were going on now. You had Mark and Luke both writing their gospels, and of course, Luke wrote Acts. We have the book of Hebrews is written while Paul's here under house arrest. He writes a letter to Titus right before he's released, and to Timothy right after he's released. And but the four prison epistles really he wrote to the church in Colossus and to Philemon, who was a member of the church of Colossus, and then he wrote to the Ephesians, and now he's writing to the Philippians. And this is a little different kind of letter because the other two churches in the church of Colossus and the church of Ephesus were both in Asia Minor. And I don't know if you remember, we talked about this in another Bible study. There was a time when Paul wrote that the churches of Asia had kind of abandoned his teachings and turned against him, and so that really wasn't the case with the churches in Macedonia. He had a great relationship and great support from the church in Philippi, the church in Thessalonica, and the church in Berea. All three of those churches, and so we'll look at that map and kind of get an idea of where that is. But what happened here is that the church in Philippi heard that he had been arrested and was there, and so they, just like the church in Colossus, the church in Philippi sent a member of their congregation, a guy named Epaphroditus. And so he goes and he's going to go take a gift. I don't know, it's probably money or maybe some items that can help him while he's under house arrest. I mean, they really were trying to support him and help him out there. Nobody knew how long he was going to be there. But they also sent him to serve, to be a servant to Paul. You know, Paul was arrested and probably chained to a guard most of the time he was there. And so he couldn't go out of the house, but he could have people go in and out for him and bring him things. And so that's kind of what Epaphroditus was going to do. But Epaphroditus ended up getting deathly ill. He almost died. And so Paul ended up sending him home early. Just once the church heard he was sick, they were concerned for him. He was concerned for them. And so Paul just said, why don't you go on home? But so we're going to look at some of these things as they have happened. We also, he also talked apparently to Paul about two members of the congregation that had difficulties or disagreements with each other. And so Paul just had a short comment in there to those two that he prayed that they would get along. So it was just a unique dynamic, the relationship he had with all these churches in Macedonia. And so I want to start today by looking at the map. And so you see the churches over here. This is Asia Minor. And so you have Ephesus right here, and right here is Colossus. And of course, Laodicea is mentioned with these two churches quite often, and they all kind of associate with each other. And just like the churches of Galatia associate together. And but here up here's the churches of Macedonia, and they kind of associate together too: Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. And so, one thing that Paul recognized in his letter was at all the churches he started after he left, the only one really that followed up with funds and support was the church of Philippi. They continued to support him throughout his ministry. So we'll look at that too. I want to look this is the time life of the Apostle Paul. And of course, we're here. He's in home arrest, under house arrest in Rome. And so we already looked at these writings, Philemon, Colossians, and Ephesians, and today we're looking at Philippians. And we also know that during this time, Mark and Luke are writing their books, and of course Luke writes the book of Acts also. And so next week we'll look at the book of Hebrews, and then right before he's released, we're going to look at Titus, and then right after he's released, we'll look at First Timothy. So that's where we are and where we're headed. I was going to show you also, excuse me. This is the chronological order of the books. Of course, we know these guys are writing their books, and right now we're talking about the prison epistles that were written from his house arrest, and so we're going to talk about the letter to the Philippians today, and next week we'll do we'll do Hebrews, and then we'll follow up with Titus and Timothy. So I was going to read this. This is my little sheet on the book of Philippians. Philippians derives its name from the Greek city where the church to which it was addressed was located. Philippi was the first town of Macedonia where Paul established a church. And this was right after, if you remember, when he crossed into Macedonia, he had picked up Luke, and they, along with Silas, and so they headed to Philippi. Timothy was probably with them too. So Philippians was written along with other prison epistles. The background: Paul visited the church in Philippi twice during his third missionary journey, and once they heard of his imprisonment, they sent Epaphroditus with donations and as a servant to serve Paul during his imprisonment. That's what I was talking about. He was able to come and go. So Paul wanted special foods or writing supplies or things like that, he was able to go get it. But after Epaphroditus became sick, Paul wanted to send him back home, and he sent him home with a letter, which was the letter to the Philippians. He wrote to express his thanks for the gift, to explain why Epaphroditus was returning early, and to inform them of his circumstances in Rome. He also wrote to encourage them towards unity and warn against false teachings. Excuse me. The theme here, Philippians, is a passage of joy in which Paul describes Christ's humiliation and exaltation and the importance of pursuing Christ's likeness. And this is one reason I think the church is falling away. Church members today aren't pursuing Christ's likeness. They're pursuing worldliness. They want the cars and the boats. And, one thing I noticed, I walk through my neighborhood, everybody has a little fire pit with chairs around it in their backyard. I mean, it's just funny when you see something in a society catch on and everybody kind of fall towards that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just funny that every house in this neighborhood has a fireplace with chairs around it in their backyard. So here's an outline. Of course, he's talking about his circumstances in jail. I can't get my throat clear today. I apologize. He talks about exhortation, standing firm against persecution, being united by humility, and remembering the example of Christ of being light in a dark world. He also talks about his companions. He gives warnings and admonitions and thankfulness. And so I wanted to point out a few things as we look here. Now, this is in Philippians chapter 2, and this is where he's talking about sending him home. Verse 25 says, I suppose it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and companion in labor and fellow soldier, but he is your messenger and he that ministered to my wants. And so he's saying that Epaphroditus means all of this to him, but he belongs to the church there, and he wants to send him back, even though they sent him to serve. And so verse 26 says, he longed after you and was full of heaviness, because ye had heard that he had been sick. For indeed he was sick, nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not only him, but also me, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. And basically he's saying, God's mercy was not me not having to deal with the sorrow of him dying. The sorrow of him being sick was hard enough. Verse 28 says, I sent him therefore the more carefully, that when you see him again, you may rejoice, that I may be less sorrowful. Receive him therefore in the Lord with all gladness, and hold such in reputation, because of the work of Christ. He was nigh unto death, not regarding his life, to supply your lack of service towards me. And so basically he's saying he understands that he was there to serve, but he felt he was better off being back home with his congregation. And so that was a little bit about that. And of course he talks, when we talked early on about Paul's life, where he records certain things about his life, and you can kind of piece together certain things. And this is one of the passages we talked about, was Philippians chapter 3. It says, that he was circumcised on the 8th day, that he was confident in his flesh. He was the stock of Israel, tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church. So he was basically giving his account that he was the kind of Hebrew that everybody desired Hebrews to be, until Christ came into his life, and he counted all those things lost for Christ, because basically they were worthless. Everything's worthless without Christ. And so here I was going to look at chapter 4. He beseeches Euodias and the Syntyche to be of the same mind. These are the two brothers apparently that had some sort of dispute, and this is all he says about it. He just encourages them to be of the same mind, which, sometimes simplicity is all you really need in trying to correct others. And so that's that. And so he writes this letter to the Philippians and sends it back with Epaphroditus, and sends him home. And so they are encouraged by this. And I'm sure this letter was circulated among other churches, just like the other letters were. And of course, it ended up into the canon of the Bible. And we're coming up on 1 year anniversary of my channel, and I think I'm going to talk about the canonicity of the Bible, how the books were all put together, how they were agreed on, what was the requirements for the writings to be considered holy and inspired by God. So that's coming up. But I hope you enjoyed it. We'll come up again next week and talk about the letter to the Hebrews, which is interesting subject in itself. So we thank you and love you, and we'll see you next time. God bless you.